Hey guys, tonight we drift into the strange, still, and storm-shadowed world of the Bermuda Triangle. A stretch of ocean whispered about in fear, where ships vanish, compasses spin, and silence lingers deeper than the sea itself. But tonight, we won't rush to solve it, we'll simply float through its mysteries, one ripple at a time. It wasn't just a zone of vanishing, it was a place where science, folklore, natural forces, and human fear danced in the mist, under skies that kept their secrets. So before you sink into the pillows, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy quiet curiosity and peaceful wonder, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. I always love seeing where our sleepy crew is watching from. Now dim the lights. Let the hum of your fan or soft rain outside become part of the journey. And together, let's gently drift beneath the waves of tonight's story. The Bermuda Triangle is not just a place. It is a feeling, a hush on the sea, a breath held in the sky. Tonight, we drift gently into this mysterious region of the Atlantic Ocean, often defined by three quiet points on a map: Miami, Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda. These coordinates seem ordinary, but within their boundaries, something strange has stirred the imagination for generations. This is not a stormy, thunder-cracked place full of chaos and fear. No, in the calm voice of a traveler drifting through stars and oceans, we find something far more subtle. The Bermuda Triangle is wrapped in fog, not just the mist of the sea, but the fog of uncertainty, of stories never fully told, of disappearances that left no ripples, and compasses that spun with no explanation. Sailors and pilots have long whispered about this space, where something unseen seems to stretch just beneath the surface. It's a vast area, spanning over 500,000 square miles, but it's not its size that captures the imagination. It's the silence. The slow unraveling of sense when things don't go as expected. This part of the ocean is home to some of the most curious tales on Earth: ships that never arrived, planes that lost their way, voices that faded into static mid-sentence. But more than anything, it holds on to its power not through proof, but through possibility. Through the feeling that somewhere between the clouds and the waves, something is just not quite right. Long before it was ever named, this stretch of water was already strange. When Christopher Columbus sailed through it in 1492, he wrote of dancing lights on the horizon, unusual compass readings, and seas that felt different, subtle notes, easily dismissed, yet always present. Over time, as trade routes expanded and technology evolved, stories of vanished ships and confused crews began to drift in from the currents. The triangle began to take shape, not just on charts, but in our collective mind. It wasn't a place of storms and monsters, but something quieter. A place that didn't need to roar. It only needed to vanish, gently, completely, and without warning. The disappearances began accumulating like clouds: the USS Cyclops in 1918, vanishing without a trace; the Rosalie, drifting empty across calm seas; the Carroll A. Deering, found abandoned off the coast of North Carolina, its crew gone without a sign of struggle. And then came the planes. The most famous story is Flight 19, 5 U.S. Navy bombers on a routine training mission in December 1945. The radio transmissions were strange, the compasses unreliable, and eventually the pilots sounded lost, disoriented, unsure of which direction was west, which was land. Then, silence. No wreckage, no final message. A rescue plane sent to find them also disappeared. It was as if the sky folded in on itself. Over the decades, stories piled higher, like layers of mist. Books were written. Theories were offered. Some blamed underwater magnetic forces. Others spoke of methane gas eruptions, sudden weather shifts, or even portals to other dimensions. And while scientists offered reasonable explanations, from rogue waves to human error, the myth endured. Not because we believed every detail, but because part of us liked the not knowing. The triangle became more than a location. It became a metaphor for the parts of nature, and of ourselves, that remain out of reach. A place we don't fully understand, and maybe never will. But there is peace in that mystery. Tonight, we do not race to find the truth. We do not seek dramatic conclusions. Instead, we float. We observe. We breathe with the waves and let the stillness of the sea tell us its quiet story. Perhaps there is no great force behind the triangle. Perhaps its legend is simply what happens when enough uncertainty gathers in one place, and our minds, so used to structure and pattern, begin to imagine shadows in the fog. Or perhaps, the shadows are real. And they're just waiting for us to stop rushing and start listening. So now, as you lie back, drifting in your own silence, imagine the triangle not as a danger zone, but as a lullaby of unanswered questions. Let it be a vast, empty place where the sky touches the sea with nothing between them but soft wind. Let the fog settle around you, not as fear, but as a gentle unknown. Because sometimes the greatest comfort comes not from knowing, but from allowing mystery to exist. And in that space, we begin tonight's journey, not lost, not afraid, just curious. Let's drift a little further, into the stories that followed. The ships that left no trace, the flights that faded into cloud. In the next part, we begin with those first true vanishings, and the moment the world began to realize that something in the triangle did not want to be found. Some mysteries don't begin with drama or noise. They begin with silence. With empty waves, and no returning sails. With ships that simply vanish, and skies that forget to echo back the voices that once crossed them. And in the case of the Bermuda Triangle, it was this silence that began whispering first, not with answers, but with absence. One of the earliest and most haunting stories is that of the USS Cyclops, a massive naval ship nearly 550 feet long, built to carry heavy cargo, and manned by more than 300 people. In March of 1918, she left the island of Barbados, sailing calmly across a familiar stretch of sea on her way to Baltimore. The skies were clear. The ocean was quiet. There were no distress calls, no strange signals, no last-minute reports. And then, nothing. The Cyclops never arrived. No debris was found. No oil slick. No lifeboats. Not even a single scrap of her hull. An entire ship, one of the largest in the Navy at the time, had disappeared into the sea, as if erased. It remains, to this day, the single largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. Navy history. But even more chilling than the scale of the tragedy was its silence. No warning. No clue. Just a long, quiet line drawn through the heart of the Atlantic. Years later, two of the Cyclops' sister ships, the Proteus and the Nereus, would also vanish along similar routes, under strangely similar conditions. Other vessels, like the Carroll A. Deering, would be found adrift with their entire crew missing, meals still set on tables, and sails intact. But no signs of struggle. No one left to explain what happened. These were not explosive disappearances. They were slow erasures, things fading quietly out of sight, like footprints washed away by the tide. As aviation entered the modern world, these stories didn't end, they simply moved upward. Planes flying over the same region began to encounter strange malfunctions. Instruments failed. Radios crackled, then went silent. One early commercial flight vanished entirely between Puerto Rico and Miami. Like the ships before it, there were no weather warnings. No mayday. No wreckage. Just a flight that should have arrived, and didn't. By the mid-20th century, a pattern began to form, not a confirmed one, not a scientific one, but a pattern of perception. People started looking back. Connecting the dots. Was it the sea? The sky? A coincidence? Or something deeper, something we hadn't yet named? And still, through it all, the ocean stayed silent. These early vanishings weren't shouting for attention. They whispered. Slowly. Over decades. And people began to listen. The disappearances weren't always dramatic, but they were consistent. Each one layered over the next, building a quiet case in the mind of the world. Not proof, but possibility. Not fear, but curiosity. The Bermuda Triangle, in its earliest days, wasn't legend or lore. It was just a place where too many things were lost, and where the losses made no sound. A place where silence spoke more loudly than words. And perhaps that's why it stayed with us. Because in a world full of noise, a place that disappears things quietly, without a trace, feels almost sacred. Or haunted. Or both. In the next chapter, we'll follow one of the most well-known disappearances of all, Flight 19, a story that turned the quiet murmurs of mystery into something the entire world would hear. But for now, just drift in this early silence, and imagine the ships beneath the waves, the skies gone still, and the stories that never quite reached home. Not because they weren't real, but because they were never finished. In the long list of stories that drift through the Bermuda Triangle, none is as famous, or as quietly haunting, as the mystery of Flight 19. It began as a routine training exercise on December 5, 1945. 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, under clear skies, piloted by experienced men who had flown these waters many times before. The plan was simple, a triangle-shaped flight path out over the Atlantic, with a return to base in a few hours. But somewhere over the sea, something shifted. The first strange transmission came from the flight's leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, whose calm voice began to express doubt. He said the compass wasn't working, that the sea below looked unfamiliar, and that they might be flying in the wrong direction. The longer they flew, the more lost they became. The confusion deepened, even though the weather remained mostly clear. Radio operators on land tried to help, offering bearings and suggestions, but Taylor's responses grew more uncertain. "We don't know where we are," he said. "Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." As dusk began to fall, the voices on the radio started to fade. One of the final messages was eerie in its stillness. "We are entering white water, nothing seems right." Then, all contact was lost. The 5 planes, and all 14 men aboard, simply vanished. A massive search effort was launched, and a rescue plane carrying 13 crew members was sent out that same evening. Within minutes, it too disappeared, never to be seen again. In just a few hours, 6 aircraft and 27 men were gone. There were no distress flares, no wreckage, no oil slicks, only silence. The Navy conducted an investigation but could not determine what happened. The official report listed the cause as unknown, which did little to stop speculation. Some blamed pilot error or mechanical failure. Others whispered of magnetic anomalies, rogue waves, or even time slips. But none of the theories could explain how so many experienced aviators vanished without a trace, in daylight, over waters that were relatively calm. What made Flight 19 so unsettling wasn't just the disappearance, it was the absence of any clear reason. The way the plane seemed to dissolve into the sky, as if taken by something larger, something unknowable. The story of Flight 19 became the defining tale of the Bermuda Triangle, the moment when quiet incidents turned into a lasting legend. It was a story told not in fear or fire, but in stillness and drifting voices. The calm before nothing. The mystery wasn't just about lost planes, it was about how such a loss could occur without a single piece left behind. In the decades since, the case has never been solved. But its quiet power remains. Flight 19 didn't just vanish into clouds and water. It vanished into history, into myth, into the soft, unfinished places in our understanding. And perhaps that's what makes it echo so deeply. Because in a world where we expect answers, this story offers only questions, and the sound of a voice saying, "Nothing looks right," before falling silent forever. When the last words of Flight 19 faded into the Atlantic air, the Navy sprang into action. At first, there was confusion, the transmission logs were strange, fragmented, unsure. But there was still time, still hope. The planes hadn't been gone long. Maybe they had landed on the water. Maybe they were floating, waiting, signaling. The sun had only just begun to set. There was still light in the sky. A rescue effort was assembled within the hour, and among the first to respond was a massive aircraft known as the PBM Mariner, a seaplane built for long-distance flights and search operations. It launched from the Naval Air Station Banana River, now Cape Canaveral, with a crew of 13 aboard. These men were experts, trained for emergency missions. The Mariner itself was heavy, loaded with fuel, designed to patrol vast areas of ocean for hours at a time. They had the latest navigation tools, full radio equipment, life rafts, and every reason to believe they'd be back before midnight. The sea was calm. The skies were darkening, but still clear. And yet, 20 minutes after takeoff, the Mariner disappeared. There was no message, no warning. 1 minute it was on radar, the next, it wasn't. A nearby ship, the SS Gaines Mills, reported seeing an explosion in the sky, a bright flash, then fire, then silence. A haze of vapor hovered over the water. The crew reported the smell of gasoline drifting across the surface. But when searchers arrived at the location, they found nothing. No wreckage. No debris. No bodies. The Mariner, like the planes it had gone to find, had simply vanished into the great wide blue. And just like that, the rescue became part of the mystery. In a single day, 6 aircraft and 27 men were lost, gone without a trace over an ocean that offered no reply. The Navy was stunned. In the following days, the search expanded rapidly. Over 300 ships and aircraft joined the effort. Warships and aircraft carriers, small patrol boats and submarines, planes with powerful lights scanned the waves, trawling mile after mile of open water. They searched not just the original flight path of Flight 19, but every possible direction, assuming the squadron may have drifted off course, following a miscalculated bearing. Thousands of square miles were combed. They flew over the Bahama Banks, over the Straits of Florida, up toward Georgia, down past Cuba. Every inch of ocean was charted again and again. Spotters with binoculars scanned the seas for life rafts, for oil slicks, for flashes of metal in the water. At night, they dropped flares, lit the sky in great glowing arcs, and listened in vain for a voice to return their call. But there was nothing. No flotsam. No remains. No final message. Only an ocean that had gone still. There was no one to explain what had happened. The investigators were left only with fragments, the last garbled radio messages from Taylor and his men, the mysterious malfunction of compasses, the eerie words, everything looked strange. Even the ocean. And now, the same silence from the rescue plane that should have brought them home. At first, the Navy leaned toward technical explanations. Perhaps Flight 19's leader had become disoriented, mistaking the Bahamas for the Florida Keys, a deadly misjudgment that could have sent them deeper into the Atlantic when they believed they were flying west toward land. But even then, why didn't they correct course? Why didn't at least one of the 5 planes break off and head in the right direction? Why did they all go silent, one after another, in a perfectly spaced formation of loss? And the Mariner, why no distress call? Why no mayday? It had the ability to glide long distances, to float on water if needed. If it had exploded mid-air, there should have been debris. Yet none was found. No piece of metal. No charred wing. No oil bubbling to the surface. It was as though the sky had simply folded in on itself and swallowed the plane whole. As days turned into weeks, the official investigation shifted focus. The pilots of Flight 19, especially Taylor, were scrutinized. Some claimed he had a history of getting lost, others defended his professionalism. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts. Some said they heard Taylor sound confused. Others insisted he was composed until the end. Radio transcripts showed unusual delays and repeat instructions, suggesting uncertainty, maybe even panic. But there was no definitive conclusion. In the end, the Navy's report listed the disappearance under one of the most haunting labels in military records, "Cause unknown." The public, however, was captivated. The press called it a modern ghost story. Headlines read like fiction: Navy planes vanish in air mystery. No trace of Flight 19 found. Search crews lost, too. In the years that followed, authors and journalists began to piece together other disappearances in the same region, crafting a larger narrative. The triangle began to take shape, a name given later, but born here, in the silent collapse of these 6 planes. What had begun as a rescue became legend. And that legend only deepened with time. The tragedy of Flight 19 and the PBM Mariner was not just that they vanished, but that the ocean refused to speak. The vast effort to find them revealed nothing, not because we didn't try hard enough, but because sometimes, the sea does not return what it takes. The search became symbolic, not only of military precision, but of human longing to understand. To make sense of things. To bring closure. And in the Bermuda Triangle, there was no closure. Only questions, and the slow, aching realization that some stories might never be finished. Even decades later, the mystery holds. Sonar scans have searched the seafloor. Wreck hunters and oceanographers have pored over maps and tide data. Retired Navy personnel still revisit the case, wondering what they missed. There have been false leads, ships discovered, planes recovered, but none have definitively matched Flight 19 or the PBM Mariner. The triangle keeps its secrets, as if time itself refuses to give them up. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of this story is how the rescue effort, meant to bring safety and resolution, became part of the same mystery it tried to solve. It was as if the triangle had extended its reach, not content to take the lost, but also the ones who dared to go looking. And in that eerie symmetry, something larger emerged. The sense that this part of the ocean was not broken or cursed, but simply different. A place that doesn't behave as expected. A place where direction bends and sound fades. A place that watches quietly, and answers in silence. Tonight, as we drift further into this tale, imagine not the panic or fear, but the stillness of the search. The hum of propellers over moonlit waves. The soft calls over the radio: Flight 19, do you read? The blinking lights passing slowly overhead, scanning empty water that ripples without reply. Imagine the quiet hope in those first hours, and the growing awe as the hours turn into a mystery that never resolves. Some places resist explanation. Some stories are not broken, just unfinished. And maybe that's what the Bermuda Triangle is, not a place of destruction, but of pause. Of suspension. Of history gently removed from our reach. As the rescue planes circled, they became part of the very thing they came to solve, like shadows trying to trace their source, swallowed by the light. And perhaps, in a way, that's where Flight 19 still is. Not gone, not destroyed, but resting just beyond understanding, somewhere in the quiet between stars and waves. Long before the Bermuda Triangle had a name, it already lived in the quiet places of the world's attention. For centuries, sailors had whispered about strange disappearances in these waters, about compasses that spun wildly, skies that darkened without warning, and ships that vanished without even a sail left behind. But it wasn't until the 20th century, and more specifically, after the loss of Flight 19, that these quiet stories began to take shape. Piece by piece, a pattern started to emerge. A soft constellation of absence, drawn not by science, but by imagination. And it was this imagination that turned scattered events into something more, a concept, a question, a mystery with its own gravity. It was no longer just the sea. It became the Bermuda Triangle. The phrase itself didn't come from folklore or navigation charts. It came from a magazine article. In 1964, a writer named Vincent Gaddis published an essay in Argosy, a pulp magazine known for its sensational and speculative pieces. The article was titled The Deadly Bermuda Triangle. In it, Gaddis drew together several known disappearances, including Flight 19, the USS Cyclops, and others, and proposed that they weren't accidents, but part of a larger, unsettling pattern. He mapped the rough triangle between Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, and gave the region a name that would echo around the world. The Bermuda Triangle, he wrote, was a zone of mystery, a place where the known rules of physics and nature seemed to break down. The article struck a chord. It was compelling, not because it offered answers, but because it framed the unknown in a way that felt possible. The disappearances were real. The facts were public. But now, they had a story. That story grew quickly. In 1969, Gaddis expanded his article into a book titled Invisible Horizons, True Mysteries of the Sea. But it wasn't until 1974 that the triangle truly exploded into the public consciousness. That year, a writer named Charles Berlitz published The Bermuda Triangle, a book that became an international bestseller. Berlitz, who came from a family known for language learning and education, had a deep fascination with lost worlds, ancient civilizations, and unsolved mysteries. His book took the stories already in circulation and presented them in a tone of curious awe. He didn't just list disappearances, he wove them into a narrative of strangeness. He asked, what if time behaves differently here? What if there are energy fields, or ancient ruins beneath the sea, interfering with reality itself? Berlitz's writing was not strictly scientific, and many of his claims were later criticized for being speculative or inaccurate, but that hardly mattered. What mattered was the feeling the book evoked. It was written like a bedtime story for adults who had not forgotten how to wonder. It tapped into something universal, the desire for mystery, for the unknown to still exist. In a world where satellites traced every storm and submarines mapped the ocean floor, the Bermuda Triangle offered a place where questions still lived. Berlitz's book sold millions of copies and was translated into dozens of languages. More importantly, it made the triangle a household name. People who had never seen the sea now spoke of it as though it were a myth they had grown up with. Soon, the Bermuda Triangle was everywhere. Television producers followed the trend, turning the stories into documentaries and dramas. In 1976, a dramatized TV special called The Bermuda Triangle aired, adding sound effects, eerie music, and grainy reenactments to real events. Viewers were captivated. Families gathered around the television, eyes wide as actors played out the last moments of Flight 19 or recreated ships disappearing in fog. The stories blurred the line between truth and fiction, but the effect was powerful. The triangle had become a character in its own right, not just a place on the map, but a presence. In the decades that followed, more books emerged, some sincere, some skeptical. Authors like Richard Weiner, John Spencer, and John Quasar all published volumes exploring the mystery. Each offered their own theories: methane gas bubbles, underwater volcanoes, alien abductions, ancient Atlantean technology. And while some focused on debunking, others leaned into the strangeness. The triangle, by now, had taken on a life beyond evidence. It became a symbol of the sea's unknowable depths, of the thin veil between science and myth, of the human need to tell stories when logic alone isn't enough. What's fascinating is how the pattern itself became the proof. The more disappearances people included under the triangle's name, the more real the idea seemed. Events that had once been treated as isolated, like a plane lost in 1948, or a cargo ship missing in 1963, were suddenly part of a greater, invisible architecture of mystery. The triangle was not just a shape, it was a lens, through which history could be reinterpreted. Every missing ship, every strange weather report, every confused pilot became part of the mythos. Even stories from long before the term existed were retrofitted into its frame. In a way, the triangle wasn't discovered, it was assembled. Built not just from events, but from the feeling those events created. That feeling was more powerful than any data point. It was the feeling of being lost. Of drifting. Of knowing that you've checked every instrument, every coordinate, and still not knowing where you are. The Bermuda Triangle came to represent that moment, that strange, breathless second where the world no longer makes sense. Where direction vanishes, and the sky becomes unfamiliar. In a modern world obsessed with certainty, the triangle stood apart, not because it explained anything, but because it didn't. And so, the mystery spread. Schools taught brief sections on it in geography classes. It appeared in cartoons, novels, even comic books. Kids told stories about it at sleepovers. Adults debated it over dinner. Pilots and sailors swapped anecdotes about strange goings-on in the region, instruments going dead for a few seconds, radio crackle that faded into static, compasses slowly spinning in calm skies. Most had explanations. But not all. And that little gap, that space between explanation and wonder, is where the triangle truly lived. In time, scientists began to push back. Oceanographers, meteorologists, and aviation experts pointed out that the Bermuda Triangle is one of the most heavily traveled areas in the world, a place where thousands of ships and planes pass safely every week. Statistically, they argued, the number of disappearances in the triangle was no higher than in any other part of the ocean. Many of the famous cases, they said, could be explained by storms, human error, mechanical failure, or natural phenomena. For example, methane hydrates, gas trapped beneath the sea floor, could in theory erupt and reduce the density of water, sinking ships without warning. Rogue waves, sudden squalls, magnetic anomalies, all were offered as rational causes. And still, the mystery held. Because the Bermuda Triangle was never just about numbers. It was about stories. About the way a pilot's voice sounds when it says, "Nothing looks right." About the way a ship disappears without even a single life ring floating in its wake. About the way the human heart reacts to absence, by trying to make meaning. Perhaps that's the deepest truth of all, the Bermuda Triangle isn't a place so much as a mood. A mythology of modern times. A reminder that even in a world mapped by satellites and explained by science, there are still corners where wonder waits, soft, silent, and unresolved. The books, the TV specials, the theories, they all serve as lighthouses pointing not toward answers, but toward imagination. They give shape to the shapeless. And they allow us, if only for a moment, to believe in the possibility of the unknown. So tonight, as we float in that space between truth and tale, let us remember that not all mysteries need solving. Some are meant to be held, like shells from a deep beach, carrying the echo of waves we'll never see. The Bermuda Triangle may not be magic. It may not defy physics or swallow ships whole. But it does do something else. It holds our attention. It quiets the mind. It reminds us that even here, in the 21st century, we still long for places that do not give up all their secrets. And that is why, despite the skeptics and the scientists and the rational explanations, the story of the triangle endures. Because somewhere in its vast, invisible shape, we've hidden a piece of ourselves, the part that wonders. The part that dreams. The part that believes, however softly, in things we cannot quite explain. Long after the headlines faded and the books began to gather dust, some minds turned not to speculation or storytelling, but to quiet, steady questions. Not everyone was searching for wonder, some were searching for answers. But even the answers came softly, like ships edging through morning fog. Scientists and oceanographers, meteorologists and navigators, began to study the region not as a legend, but as a puzzle of natural forces. They were not here to dismiss the mystery outright, but to understand whether it had roots in the real, if perhaps, just perhaps, the triangle's strangeness came not from the impossible, but from a convergence of rare but explainable events. And like the sea itself, their findings were vast, shifting, and not always easy to hold. Point one of the first and most enduring theories was rooted in magnetism. The Earth's magnetic field, which helps guide compasses and orientation systems, is not perfectly stable. There are places where magnetic north and true north, the direction of the North Pole, align unusually. These areas, known as magnetic anomalies, can interfere with navigation equipment. Interestingly, the Bermuda Triangle lies near one of the rare spots on Earth where such alignment occasionally occurs. Could this explain why compasses in the region seem to misbehave? Why pilots, like those in Flight 19, spoke of strange bearings and confused directions? Perhaps. But it's not the kind of interference that makes instruments spin wildly, as stories sometimes suggest. It's subtler, a slow drift in readings, a quiet error that, if not noticed, can grow into something fatal. In the vast emptiness of the sea or sky, even a 1-degree mistake, followed over hours, can lead far from safety. So maybe, some said, the triangle wasn't mysterious, just mathematically merciless. But the atmosphere, too, plays its games. Another theory pointed not downward to the earth, but upward to the sky, to the powerful, shifting systems of weather that sweep across the Atlantic basin. The Bermuda Triangle sits in a highly dynamic zone where cold fronts, warm ocean currents, and tropical moisture frequently collide. This combination gives rise to sudden storms, forming faster than radar can always detect. Pilots flying in good weather can find themselves caught in violent downdrafts or pockets of turbulence. Ships may face what seem like calm waters, only to be struck by microbursts or lightning-filled squalls. Many of the early ships and planes lost to the triangle vanished before modern weather tracking was reliable, before satellites or Doppler radar. Their last reports were often calm, unbothered, until they were gone. Nature, in this part of the world, doesn't always give warnings. And then there are the waves, vast, powerful, unpredictable. In recent decades, researchers have confirmed the existence of a phenomenon once thought to be rare, the rogue wave. These are enormous walls of water, rising without warning in otherwise average seas. They can reach heights of over 100 feet, and they do not behave like ordinary waves. They can hit from multiple angles, collapsing over ships with sudden, stunning force. The triangle, with its intersecting currents and shallow shelves, is a perfect birthplace for these rogue waves. For smaller vessels or even large cargo ships, one such wave can be enough to capsize, flood, or sink within minutes. And once the sea closes in, it often erases what it took. The ocean is deep here, with trenches that run miles downward. A ship could sink in silence and never be seen again. Each of these theories, magnetism, weather, waves, offers a possible piece of the puzzle. None is mystical. None require other worlds or ancient technologies. They are all grounded in what we know about nature, and yet, there's something about the tone of them that keeps the door gently ajar. Because even the science feels a little strange here. Not in content, but in feeling. The anomalies are real, but they don't happen everywhere. The storms form quickly, but not always. The waves rise without reason. The question becomes not whether these events are possible, but whether they cluster here more than elsewhere. And if so, why? Some scientists think it's not about location, but attention. The Bermuda Triangle, they argue, is not especially dangerous, it's just especially famous. Any strange disappearance within its imaginary borders is more likely to be remembered, more likely to be reported, more likely to be mythologized. It becomes part of the pattern, whether or not it fits. Meanwhile, similar losses in other parts of the world, the Indian Ocean, the South Pacific, even the Great Lakes, go unnoticed. So perhaps the real force at play isn't natural at all. Perhaps it's narrative. And yet, the triangle still lingers. The questions remain. The ocean doesn't care whether we explain it with science or stories, it moves with the same slow rhythm either way. And in the Bermuda Triangle, that rhythm just feels a little deeper, a little older, a little harder to measure. Scientific explanations offer comfort, yes, but even the scientists, in their calm language and careful studies, admit there is still much we do not know. They do not say, there is no mystery. They say, there is a lot left to understand. So we're left with theories, elegant, incomplete, respectful of the sea's complexity. The Bermuda Triangle may not be supernatural, but it is not ordinary either. It sits at the edge of meteorology, at the threshold of oceanography, in a place where multiple forces overlap. Magnetic fields. Atmospheric pressure. deep currents, seafloor terrain. It is, quite literally, a convergence zone, where natural laws bend into something harder to observe and easier to misread. Maybe that's all it ever was. Or maybe, like the wind, it carries something else, something unnamed, something ancient, moving just beyond the reach of radar. Among all the stories that drift out of the Bermuda Triangle, few images are as quietly haunting as the compass gone wrong. A needle spinning without direction. A pilot watching the dial tremble, point north, then shift, slowly or suddenly, as if unsure of its purpose. For many, this is where the mystery begins, not in the waves or the wind, but in the gentle, silent defiance of the instruments meant to keep us safe. The compass, after all, is one of humanity's oldest tools, a device that, since ancient times, has guided sailors through fog, storms, and darkness. It is supposed to be constant, unshaken. So when it falters, especially over the open sea, the world feels different. Less secure. Less familiar. And it's this moment, the moment the compass begins to misbehave, that lives at the center of the Bermuda Triangle's legend. Accounts of compass malfunctions in the region go back decades. Pilots flying over calm waters have described needles drifting without explanation, sometimes deviating by as much as 10 or 20 degrees. Some sailors reported that multiple compasses on the same ship would disagree with one another, one pointing north, the other subtly veering west. In the case of Flight 19, the squadron's commander, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, famously reported that his compasses were not working. "We don't know where we are," he said. "One of our compasses is out." That phrase, that soft confession of uncertainty, became a defining part of the mystery. It suggested not just human confusion, but technological betrayal. If even the compass could not be trusted, what was left? Over the years, these reports accumulated, like drifting bottles in the sea. Some were anecdotal. Others were logged in official reports. But all of them pointed to the same quiet question: why here? Why did the Bermuda Triangle seem to interfere with something so basic, so universal, as magnetic north? To understand what might be happening, we have to go beneath the mystery, into the Earth itself. Our planet is surrounded by a vast magnetic field, generated by the movement of molten iron in its outer core. This field, while stable on a large scale, is not perfectly uniform. It bends and ripples, forming magnetic anomalies, places where the magnetic lines of force behave unusually. These anomalies can distort compass readings, especially in areas where the Earth's crust is especially dense or fractured. And the triangle? It sits near one of the most interesting magnetic regions in the Western Hemisphere. Specifically, the agonic line, a line where magnetic north and true north align perfectly, passes close to the triangle at certain times, depending on how the Earth's magnetic field shifts. Along this line, compass readings behave differently, often with small but significant deviations that can disorient even trained navigators. The strange part is, this phenomenon is real, observable, and measurable. And that's where things become quietly fascinating. Because unlike so many aspects of the triangle myth, this part has a basis in truth. Magnetic variation is not just folklore, it's science. Still, most modern navigation systems account for this. Planes and ships are equipped with multiple instruments, including gyroscopic compasses, GPS, and inertial navigation systems that are largely immune to magnetic interference. Yet, even today, strange compass behavior continues to be reported in and around the Bermuda Triangle. Pilots speak of momentary drift, of slow and inexplicable misreadings that correct themselves after a few minutes. Sailors notice that their compasses seem sluggish or out of sync. In most cases, these anomalies are minor. They don't cause disasters. They're often corrected by backup systems. But they linger, unexplained. And even in their smallness, they carry that old feeling, the feeling of being gently, invisibly pushed off course. That feeling, perhaps, is what gave rise to so many stories. Over time, these quiet compass errors became woven into the triangle's mythology. In popular books and TV specials, the drifting needle became a symbol, not just of magnetic confusion, but of reality itself bending. Some writers suggested that the triangle contained magnetic lines of force stronger than anywhere else on Earth, capable of pulling ships off course, even tearing apart space and time. Others spoke of geomagnetic vortices, swirling pockets of invisible energy, where the fabric of our world is thinner, more fragile. These ideas were not grounded in conventional science, but they captured something the data couldn't. They gave shape to the unease. And perhaps, in their own way, they weren't entirely wrong. Because while we may not find literal vortices spinning beneath the waves, there is something unusual about the way people respond to the triangle. The compass, quiet, old, patient, becomes a metaphor for the self. When it spins, we feel unanchored. When it points in two directions at once, we sense something deeper, a world that doesn't always behave, that doesn't always explain itself. In time, scientists began to examine these stories with more rigor. Studies were conducted, mapping magnetic anomalies in the region. Researchers found that while there were indeed minor variations, they were not extreme, certainly not enough to cause planes to fall or ships to vanish. In most cases, a trained navigator could easily compensate. So why did the legends persist? Maybe it's because the legends weren't just about the needle. They were about the moment the needle betrayed us. The moment a sailor, alone on a quiet night, looked down and saw the compass shift, not dramatically, but just enough to cause doubt. In the open ocean, doubt is dangerous. It spreads quickly. A small error in course becomes a larger one. Minutes turn into miles. And all the while, the sea says nothing. It just moves, endless and wide. There is also the possibility that the legends amplified themselves. Once the triangle gained its reputation, every minor compass error became part of the myth. A reading that might be ignored elsewhere became, in these waters, a sign. A whisper from something larger. And so, reality and story blurred. The compass continued to point north, but we, perhaps, were following something else. In recent years, researchers have mapped the magnetic field over the triangle in extraordinary detail. They've found that while it's complex, it is not dramatically different from many other oceanic regions. Yet the reports of compass drift persist. Perhaps they always will. Not because the triangle is magical, but because we carry within us the capacity to feel something more than instruments can show. And when a needle trembles, we listen. Tonight, as we float above those waters in thought, we might imagine not a storm or a shipwreck, but something quieter, a pilot in 1945, glancing down at his compass and noticing that it no longer points true. A captain in 1920, checking two compasses and finding them disagree. A boy reading these stories decades later, and wondering if the world is stranger than he was told. The compass is not broken. It's just uncertain. And in that uncertainty, we find the heart of the mystery. Because sometimes, it's not the storm that shakes us, it's the idea that the very thing meant to guide us might, however briefly, go silent. The sea, when seen from above, seems endless. But it is not empty. Beneath that soft horizon lies a second world, older, quieter, and stranger than anything on land. And in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle, that hidden world becomes even more mysterious. Here, the ocean is not just deep. It is layered, folded, shaped by time and tectonics into an underwater landscape few have truly seen. If you could drift downward, sinking slowly through those warm Atlantic layers, you would pass through miles of currents and darkness, past creatures that shimmer like stars, into a place where the earth itself seems to sleep. The Bermuda Triangle rests atop one of the most geologically complex parts of the ocean. Along its floor lies the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean. It plunges more than 27,000 feet, nearly 5 miles straight down. A place of constant motion, where the Caribbean plate and the North American plate meet and shift and grind. Earthquakes tremble through this region. Submarine landslides occur. Whole sections of seabed can collapse in silence. And through it all, the sea rolls on, bearing no sign of the upheaval below. A ship or plane lost above such depths may never be found, not because it is erased, but because it has drifted into the unreachable. Explorers and scientists who have sent unmanned vehicles into these waters describe a world of eerie stillness. Vast underwater cliffs, alien plains of sediment, and sudden drop-offs that descend into pitch-black voids. The seafloor here is carved by strong, multidirectional currents, especially around the Gulf Stream, a mighty, warm river of ocean that flows like a moving highway. These currents don't just push water, they move debris, wreckage, even evidence, scattering it far from its origin. A downed aircraft might sink quickly, pulled sideways by deep flows, then be covered over time by layers of soft marine silt. A ship, broken by pressure or torn apart by descent, may rest in pieces miles apart. In these waters, vanishing is not difficult. It's almost expected, even with modern technology, sonar, deep-sea drones, satellite mapping, the triangle's seabed remains largely unmapped. Less than 20% of the ocean floor has been fully explored, and the parts that lie beneath this mysterious stretch are some of the most logistically challenging. Visibility is low. Pressure is immense. Communications are spotty. And the area is vast. Searching for a single wreck beneath thousands of square miles is like trying to find a single note in a symphony, long after the music has ended. Some attempts have been made. In 1968, the U.S. Navy launched a search for the missing submarine USS Scorpion, believed lost somewhere near the triangle's edge. It took months, and even with classified technology and global resources, the wreck was only found after extensive effort, broken, silent, deep beyond easy reach. This event, though explained, mirrored many of the triangle's disappearances: sudden loss of communication, a vanished craft, and the difficulty of recovery. The sea floor, it seems, is not just deep. It is unknowable. And what of the stories? Wrecks of ships and planes that went missing decades ago are thought to rest down there, nestled in chasms, crumpled among undersea cliffs. Some say the Cyclops, the massive Navy collier lost in 1918 with over 300 men aboard, lies somewhere in the deeper folds of this seabed, undisturbed, preserved in cold stillness, its hull perhaps cracked by pressure or impact. Others believe parts of Flight 19 may someday be found, their twisted metal frames wrapped in marine growth, resting together in quiet fellowship. But no one knows for sure. The triangle, even at its most explored, still keeps its deepest stories to itself. And it's not just the missing that lie below. The seafloor tells other tales, of ancient lands now drowned, of coral structures and limestone shelves that hint at geologic ages we barely remember. Some have speculated that Atlantis, if it ever existed, may have sunk here, that the strange formations found off the coast of Bimini are ruins, not rock. Scientists largely disagree. But the myth lingers, carried by the same currents that bear the triangle's mysteries, slow, persistent, and hard to silence. There's something quietly poetic about how this works. The triangle's mystery is not only in the skies or storms, but in the distance between the surface and the floor. In that yawning, dark vertical gap where no sunlight penetrates, where sound fades into pressure, where technology still falters. Every object lost above, every compass, engine, logbook, name, eventually drifts down into a world where time slows. The wrecks that do exist are not ruined, they are resting. Touched only by fish, by silence, by salt. And so, we wonder. How many answers lie beneath, covered by sand and coral? How many ships, intact but unreachable, sleep in underwater canyons with their stories sealed inside? How many final transmissions, clipped, confused, half-sent, have echoes only below, too deep for us to hear? Perhaps one day we'll know more. Our technology will grow. Our maps will fill in. Sonar will reach further, submersibles will go deeper, and black boxes once thought lost may surface. But until then, the sea holds its secrets gently, not cruelly, but with a kind of dignity. Like a library without lights, its shelves full of unread histories. The Bermuda Triangle, seen this way, isn't just a place where things disappear. It's where they rest, beyond noise, beyond urgency, beneath miles of water and time. So tonight, as we drift a little closer to sleep, let us remember that not everything is meant to be recovered. Some stories are meant to sink, not to be forgotten, but to be honored. And in the stillness of the deep, they remain, untouched, unexplained, and quietly, endlessly there. There is something in us, quiet, ancient, unchanging, that reaches for meaning when the world grows silent. It is not just fear that rises in uncertainty. It is imagination. And nowhere is that more quietly visible than in the stories we tell about the Bermuda Triangle. Because long after the wreckage is gone, long after the signal fades, long after the names are read aloud and remembered, what remains is not just fact. It is feeling. And in the absence of clarity, we fill the space with story, not to deceive, but to understand. Not to invent, but to soothe. The human mind does not like blank spaces. We are born into a world too wide to grasp, and so from the beginning, we make patterns. We see faces in clouds, constellations in stars, fate in the shuffle of cards. We want events to link, moments to matter, endings to mean something. When a plane vanishes from radar without a trace, it is not enough for us to say, it disappeared. We want to know why. And when we cannot find the reason, we begin to shape a version of the truth that carries meaning, even if it cannot carry proof. The Bermuda Triangle, in many ways, became our modern mythological canvas. A place where the rules of physics might stretch. Where time might ripple. Where reality might, for a moment, forget to follow its script. It began with scattered disappearances, accidents with little evidence and fewer answers. But soon, it became something more, a space where our quietest questions could take form. What lies beyond reason? Where does a person go when they vanish? And how do we make peace with the idea that some things, even with all our tools, maps, satellites, and logic, might never be known? In the Triangle, we found a place to explore those questions safely. It is not a place of violence or vengeance. It is not haunted in the way of ghost stories. Instead, it is a mystery with soft edges, wrapped in clouds, cast in fog, floating somewhere between science and dream. We project onto it our hopes for wonder, our fear of the unknown, and our secret belief that the universe still holds surprises. In an age where the globe has been charted and the stars catalogued, the Triangle whispers that perhaps not everything has been answered. And that whisper, more than any data point, is what keeps it alive. We are, after all, storytelling creatures. It is how we survived, long before writing or machines. Around fires and in caves, we shared stories to explain thunder, the stars, the changing seasons. And now, even surrounded by technology, we continue the ritual. The Triangle is one of those stories, a modern myth made not of gods or monsters, but of absence. It's a tale woven from what isn't there, no wreck, no signal, no goodbye. That absence feels unnatural, and so we make it sacred, and like all sacred places, it gathers layers. For some, it is a scientific challenge, a puzzle to be solved with equations and maps. For others, it is a spiritual question, a symbol of nature's mystery and power. And for many, it is simply a dream, an idea that something more lies beneath the surface. That reality might, just maybe, have a few soft spots where the rules thin, and wonder seeps through. The Bermuda Triangle is not just a place. It is a mirror. It reflects back to us our quietest longings. Our longing for answers. Our longing for adventure. Our longing for the possibility that the world is not yet finished telling its stories. Because if people can vanish into the sky or the sea without a trace, then the universe is still writing, still unfolding in ways we don't yet understand. There is beauty in that. And there is peace. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be held, like a seashell, smooth, hollow, echoing with the voice of something far away. The Bermuda Triangle offers that kind of mystery. The kind that doesn't demand panic or fear, but quiet respect. It reminds us that in a world ruled by schedules, screens, and answers, there is still a space, vast and blue and softly strange, where not knowing is allowed. To those below, it's just another flight. To those above, it may be the strangest ride of their lives. And yet, it's rarely dramatic. It's subtle. That's what makes it so quietly frightening. There are no flashing lights, no thunderclaps. Just the soft, unsettling shift from everything is fine to something isn't right. One instrument flickers. One voice crackles. One gauge stalls. And suddenly, a pilot is not flying through blue air, they're flying through uncertainty. The skies above the triangle don't scream. They whisper. And we are left with their stories. Pilots who returned shaken. Pilots who didn't return at all. Weather reports that show calm conditions, and yet, something happened. Something the data can't quite catch. And so we ask again, is it science? Is it chance? Is it something older, a memory, maybe, written in the sky long before we learned to fly? Perhaps it's all of these. Perhaps the sky, like the sea, holds on to its mysteries with quiet pride. Perhaps it allows us to pass through, usually. And perhaps, on certain days, under certain clouds, it decides not to. Not maliciously. Just unpredictably. As nature does. So tonight, as we imagine those clouds glowing faintly in moonlight, those high-altitude rivers curling through air too thin to breathe, let us remember that the sky is not solid. It moves. It breathes. It stirs in ways we don't always see. And over the Bermuda Triangle, it seems to stir just a little more. Not with anger. Not with intent. But with quiet complexity, enough to make even experienced pilots glance twice at the altimeter. Enough to turn a routine flight into something mythic. Enough to remind us, once again, that mystery does not only live in darkness. Sometimes, it lives in blue sky. The ocean is often thought of as still, a vast sheet of blue stretching calmly from horizon to horizon. But beneath that surface, it is always in motion. Not just in waves or tides, but in ways we don't often imagine. It shifts and settles and exhales. And sometimes, those deep, quiet breaths rise from the ocean floor in sudden, silent force. One of the gentler scientific ideas linked to the Bermuda Triangle, and one of its most fascinating, is the theory of methane hydrate eruptions. A theory that doesn't scream of disaster or science fiction, but instead whispers of geology, time, and breath rising from below. Deep beneath the triangle, and much of the ocean floor, lies something both beautiful and volatile, methane clathrates, or methane hydrates. These are frozen crystals, formed when methane gas is trapped inside cages of water molecules, stabilized by the cold and immense pressure of the deep sea. They look almost like snow or glass, fragile and invisible from above, but resting in great fields beneath the seabed. And for the most part, they sleep. But every now and then, conditions change. A shift in temperature. A landslide in the sediment. A tectonic tremor deep underfoot. Any of these can destabilize the hydrates, causing them to release their gas. When this happens, the result is sudden and astonishing. Vast plumes of methane rise through the water, bubbling violently to the surface. The sea above churns, froths, and momentarily loses its buoyancy. And in that moment, if a ship is passing above, it may no longer float. Without warning, the ship sinks straight down, engulfed not by waves, but by a brief collapse in physics. Scientists studying this theory have recreated these conditions in the lab. They've shown how methane release can reduce the density of seawater, how an object that floats easily on calm ocean can suddenly plunge if the water is filled with gas. It is quiet science. Subtle. But in the right conditions, it can explain how a ship could vanish without a trace. No distress call, no debris, just gone. The sea would close over it, bubbles would rise, and then the calm would return. As if nothing had happened. This idea is not fantasy. Methane hydrates have been found in large quantities throughout the ocean floor, especially in continental margin zones like those off the coast of Florida and the Caribbean, right beneath the triangle. Geologists have even linked past mass extinctions to massive undersea methane releases. And in rare moments, the sea has been seen boiling without heat, not from volcanic activity, but from sudden gas eruptions from below. These are the ocean's deep sighs, ancient, natural, and easy to miss from the sky. Could this explain every disappearance in the triangle? No. Airplanes are not affected by these eruptions. But for ships, especially older vessels or those traveling slowly, it's a possibility. The triangle, with its deep trenches and tectonic edges, may be one of many places where these events happen, rare and unseen. And in a world still being mapped, even today, these sudden underwater events are difficult to trace, especially after they've passed. But like everything in the triangle, it's not just about the science. It's about what the science feels like. The image of the ocean gently exhaling, pulling a vessel downward without violence, touches something deep in us. It reminds us that nature's power is not always thunder and lightning. Sometimes it is slow, quiet, geologic. A whisper, not a roar. A natural mystery, waiting to be understood, not to erase the wonder, but to frame it in context. And even as methane hydrate theory gains support, it does not shrink the myth. It deepens it. It gives us something real, something ancient, a breath that rises from the Earth's crust, unnoticed until it is too late. In a way, it connects us more deeply to the planet beneath us. The triangle, then, becomes not just a place of accidents or anomalies, but a living part of Earth's geology, a place where the planet itself occasionally moves, and reminds us how little we see of its vast interior life. So as we drift tonight, let us listen for that slow breath. Not loud. Not sudden. But steady and old. Let us remember that under all this water, beneath the waves, the current, the salt, lies a sleeping engine of stone and ice and gas. And every once in a while, it sighs. Long before we had the tools to scan the seafloor or simulate magnetic fields, we had something just as powerful, imagination. And once the Bermuda Triangle entered our minds, it never left. It crept gently into the stories we told late at night, into the flickering glow of TV screens, the pages of dog-eared paperbacks, and the whispery theories passed between curious minds. The mystery, real or not, became something bigger than truth. It became a shared dream. A place where culture, memory, and myth blurred into one. In the 20th century, as the Triangle's name gained traction, it found fertile ground in the growing world of pop culture. Bookshelves filled with titles like The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz, one of the most influential voices in shaping the myth. His book, published in 1974, sold millions of copies, offering eerie tales of vanishing ships and lost aircraft, and hinting that science alone couldn't explain the silence of the sea. It wasn't rigorous, but it was compelling, and for many, it was the first time they saw that part of the map not as a body of water, but as a portal. A place where something unseen was at work. Television followed. Documentaries and specials, often narrated in hushed, suspenseful tones, aired during quiet evenings, casting dramatic reenactments and sonar scans in deep blues and grays. Shows like In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy's haunting voice, made entire generations wonder about the triangle. Even if they didn't fully believe, they were captivated. Because the story wasn't about proof. It was about possibility. And then there were the movies. Some leaned into science fiction, others into subtle unease. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg wove the mystery of Flight 19 into the arrival of extraterrestrials, suggesting that perhaps the vanished hadn't died, but had simply moved on to somewhere else. Other films imagine time slips, underwater civilizations, or ancient forces waiting in the deeps. Each used the triangle not as a villain, but as a canvas, a soft blue mystery, shaped by whatever the story needed most. Even cartoons joined the conversation. Kids' shows like Scooby-Doo, DuckTales, and the Magic School Bus all took their turns drifting into the triangle, each treating it as a place where rules bent, compasses spun, and nothing was quite as it seemed. These versions didn't aim to scare. They aimed to wonder. And that wonder, planted early, grew. In magazines and tabloids, the Bermuda Triangle became part of the same constellation as Bigfoot, Atlantis, and Area 51. Wild theories bloomed. Some claimed the triangle was a gateway to another dimension, a thinning of the veil where time and space folded. Others suggested ancient crystal technologies beneath the ocean, or that extraterrestrials used the region as a quiet harvesting ground for study. These ideas were not always believed, but they weren't dismissed either. They were entertained, stored somewhere in the back of the mind like a favorite dream you don't quite understand but don't want to forget. And as the internet arrived, the triangle took on new life. Forums, YouTube channels, mystery blogs, and sleepy podcasts, perhaps not unlike this one, all carried its story forward. Some explored it skeptically. Others wrapped it in gentle awe. What mattered was not the answer, but the feeling. The feeling that there were still places in the world that hadn't been fully explained, and that the triangle, real, imagined, or both, was a reminder that some mysteries don't need solving to be beautiful. Because the Bermuda Triangle is not just a place. It is a cultural dreamscape. A misty, shared space where stories echo, generation after generation. Children once whispered its name under blanket forts with flashlights. Adults still watch documentaries late at night, lulled by sonar pings and vintage radio static. Artists sketch storm clouds over ships. Writers pen stories where navigation fails. Musicians write songs about going missing into the blue. And somewhere in it all, the triangle waits, not as a trap, but as an idea. A dream that just keeps drifting. In this way, the triangle is a kind of folklore, not unlike old sea shanties or legends of ghost ships. A blend of fact, feeling, and fiction, held together not by data but by longing. Longing for the unknown. For the edge of the map. For that one place that refuses to be fully understood. So tonight, as you close your eyes and let your mind float, maybe you'll find yourself there, somewhere in the warm, quiet blue, where the compass drifts gently and the stars shine just a little differently. Maybe, for a moment, you'll feel what so many before you have felt, that hush, that mystery, that unnameable something, waiting in the triangle. In the quiet light of reason, there is a kind of beauty. It's not as loud as awe, or as dazzling as wonder. But it is steady, and kind, and it listens. And when we look at the Bermuda Triangle through the lens of science, through facts and numbers, not fog and whispers, what we often find is not disbelief, but a gentle invitation to understand. Not everything mysterious is magical, and not everything magical needs to be defended. Sometimes, clarity itself can be comforting. And many scientists, over decades of patient study, have come to a quiet conclusion. Statistically, the Bermuda Triangle may be no more mysterious than any other well-traveled part of the world. That idea may feel strange at first. Disappointing, even. But sit with it a little longer, and it begins to settle into something warm. Because it doesn't mean the stories weren't worth telling. It doesn't mean the wonder was wasted. It simply means that our world, even when ordinary, is still full of patterns, and rules, and soft complexities that deserve attention. And perhaps, even more importantly, it reminds us that the human heart creates mystery not just from facts, but from feelings. Let's begin, quietly, with the numbers. The area often described as the Bermuda Triangle, a vast stretch of the Atlantic Ocean bordered loosely by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, is one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes and flight paths in the world. Every day, hundreds of vessels pass through its waters or skies, moving between the Americas, Europe, and the Caribbean. The weather there is dynamic, driven by trade winds, the Gulf Stream, and tropical conditions. It's also home to deep trenches, coral shoals, and complex ocean currents, all natural features that make navigation a challenge, especially in older eras of maritime history. When people began noticing, or believing, that disappearances happened here more often, scientists took notice. Researchers from institutions like NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. Coast Guard, and Lloyd's of London, as well as independent statisticians, began to compare disappearance rates in the Triangle to those in other major oceanic regions. And what they found, time and again, is that the Triangle doesn't show unusual activity. The number of ships and planes lost in that region, when adjusted for traffic and weather, aligns closely with the global average. There are no statistically significant spikes. No zones of inexplicable danger. Just a place with heavy use, tropical weather, and a long list of stories. But that doesn't mean nothing happened. It just means we have explanations now. Or at least, some. The USS Cyclops, for example, the Navy ship that vanished in 1918 with 309 men aboard, was likely overloaded, poorly balanced, and sailing during a period of strong storm activity. Flight 19, the squadron of Navy bombers lost in 1945, may have suffered from navigational error, disorientation, and fuel exhaustion. Many disappearances once linked to the Triangle have been reclassified after more data became available: storms that weren't visible from shore, mechanical failures that were later corroborated, or simply miscommunications in an age before GPS and satellite tracking. The ocean is, by its very nature, a place of risk. Even today, with all our technology, vessels still vanish, not just in the Triangle, but in the Indian Ocean, the South Pacific, the Arctic. The sea is vast, and deep, and in many ways, still unmapped. The skies too, while tamed by radar and routes, can surprise us with turbulence, wind shear, or subtle equipment faults that become fatal in combination. And when a disappearance occurs in an otherwise ordinary location, it doesn't become famous. It becomes a footnote. But when it happens in the Triangle, it becomes part of the myth. This, too, is human nature: to cluster stories, to create patterns, to place pins in maps and draw shapes that feel meaningful. The name Bermuda Triangle wasn't always part of the mystery. It was coined in 1964, in an article by Vincent Gaddis, and popularized further by Charles Berlitz in his best-selling books. The stories existed before, but scattered. Once the name was given, the narrative began to grow, not because the danger increased, but because the lens through which we viewed that danger had shifted. Skeptics aren't trying to erase mystery. In many cases, they're trying to give it depth. To take the story apart, gently, and look at each piece. A vanished ship? Let's check the weather. An odd radio call? Let's consider electrical interference. A missing plane? Let's explore mechanical records. This isn't disrespect. It's curiosity, the same spark that led us to fly and sail in the first place. The same spark that led us to create myths. Science, after all, is not the enemy of mystery. It is one of its many languages. And just as we respect the stories of loss, we can also respect the work of those who tried to make sense of them: meteorologists who studied the paths of hurricanes, naval historians who combed through logs and manifests, aviation experts who recreated flight patterns. Their work doesn't make the Triangle less interesting. It makes it more human. It reveals not just the silence of disappearance, but the effort to understand. The long hours. The careful calculations. The desire to make sure fewer families have to live with unanswered questions. And there's something beautiful in that, the quiet, stubborn belief that every story deserves an ending. That not all mystery must remain. That some closure, even partial, is an act of love. Yet even among skeptics, there is space for wonder. Because even if the triangle isn't supernatural, it's still extraordinary. Its waters are home to bioluminescent creatures, drifting sargassum seas, vast underwater trenches, and fast-moving currents that defy the surface's calm. Its skies are pierced by lightning more often than almost anywhere else on Earth. It is a place where storm and stillness meet, where the horizon stretches further than the eye can hold, and where, sometimes, the instruments do flicker, the signals do fade, and even seasoned navigators feel something stir beneath the calm. And perhaps that's the final, gentle truth of this story, that skepticism does not erase mystery. It reframes it. It teaches us that beauty does not depend on the unexplained, that knowing why a thing happens does not make it less profound. That the ocean, even without ghosts, is a place of awe. That the sky, even with predictable winds, is still endlessly vast. That a ship sailing into a storm is just as brave, and just as poetic, whether or not the storm has a name. So if the Bermuda Triangle is not haunted, that's okay. If it holds no portals or time slips or ancient machines, it's still worth wondering about. Because what it does hold is something even older, our human impulse to question. To collect stories. To gaze at a blank spot on the map and feel our hearts stir. That is where the real magic lives, not in what we lose, but in how we imagine the loss. Tonight, we let the triangle drift into soft focus. We allow the science to settle, gently, like silt on the ocean floor. We thank the researchers, the skeptics, the thinkers who gave shape to the silence. And we remind ourselves that even without mystery, the ocean is still a poem. Even without myth, the sky is still a dream. And even when nothing supernatural happens, the world, in all its quiet rules and rhythms, is still enough to take our breath away. Because what matters, in the end, is not whether the Bermuda Triangle is dangerous. What matters is that it made us look. It made us ask. It made us wonder. And sometimes, that's all a mystery needs to do. Not every place is meant to be found on a map. Some places exist not in geography, but in feeling, tucked somewhere between truth and wonder, between the tides of what we know and the quiet depths of what we don't. And perhaps the Bermuda Triangle is one of those places. Not just a triangle of sea and sky, but a triangle of thought. A symbol. A metaphor. A soft space in our minds where certainty loosens its grip, and something beautifully unknowable takes its place. We've talked about storms and currents. About magnetic lines and missing ships. About facts and science and theories whispered through time. But now, as our journey slows and the ocean turns still beneath the stars, we can let the triangle become something larger than coordinates. We can let it float, like a dream just out of reach, and see it not as a trap or a threat, but as a symbol for something deeper, the parts of the world we don't fully grasp, and maybe never will. Because the truth is, there are many triangles in life. Not just this one in the Atlantic, but others, scattered across the earth, and sky, and soul. There are places in the human body that remain mysterious even to modern medicine. Places in deep space where physics seems to change its rules. Places in the heart where logic cannot enter, and yet feeling thrives. The Bermuda Triangle, then, becomes a kind of poetry. A reminder that even in our age of data and precision, we still allow room for wonder. And what a peaceful thing that is. To let go of the need to explain every shadow. To float instead in curiosity, quiet, slow, open. Some people find comfort in answers. Others find it in the space where answers don't yet live. Where a question can echo for years, for centuries, and still feel fresh each time it is asked. What happened to those ships? Why did those planes vanish? Did something reach up from the sea, or down from the stars, or was it simply the wind, the wave, the world doing what the world always does? We may never know, not completely. But does that make the story less real? Or more alive? In this way, the triangle becomes not a danger, but an invitation. A place where the rules bend just enough to make room for dreams. Where the sea might be hiding more than salt and sediment. Where the air might carry more than wind. Where the sky might, just might, be deeper than we thought, and maybe that's what we need sometimes. Not new facts, but new metaphors. New symbols that tell us it's okay not to know. That mystery isn't failure, it's freedom. It's a reminder that not everything in life can be charted. Not every question must be answered. Some things are meant to be floated with, drifted through, held gently and released like breath. So tonight, we allow the Bermuda Triangle to soften. We let it become not a sharp edge, but a gentle shape. Not a warning, but a whisper. Not a mystery to fear, but a reminder to be curious, always. Because as long as we have places we don't fully understand, we have reasons to keep looking. As long as the ocean has shadows, we have reasons to keep imagining. And as long as the sky has silence, we have space to keep dreaming. The triangle, then, becomes a mirror, reflecting not monsters, but our own longing to explore. Not vanishings, but the truth that some parts of life are simply beyond reach. And that maybe, in that space beyond reach, is where the most beautiful parts of being human live. So here we are, at the edge of everything, floating not just above the Bermuda Triangle, but somewhere quieter still, somewhere inside the hush between questions and answers. And maybe, just maybe, this is where we're meant to be. Because not every story needs an ending, and not every mystery begs to be solved. Some truths live not in data, but in feeling. The ocean, the sky, the stars, they are vast for a reason. They are allowed to keep secrets. And perhaps, in a world so full of noise, that silence is something sacred. We've drifted through history and legend, followed the trails of vanished ships and missing planes, listened to whispers of magnetism and methane and clouded skies, and still, we find ourselves here, with more wonder than certainty. But that wonder is gentle. It's enough. It holds us without demand. What if the beauty of the Bermuda Triangle lies not in what was lost, but in how it reminded us to pause, to breathe, to gaze, to feel small without fear? Tonight, the map folds itself away, and the compass can rest. Let the sea keep its ancient memories. Let the wind curl around unanswered questions. Let the stars blink slowly above, knowing we are still learning how to look up. And you, wherever you are now, beneath blankets or stars or ceiling fans, you've wandered far enough. The waves are calm. The night is still. Let yourself be held, not by answers, but by quiet. Drift, dream, and know this, the mystery will still be here tomorrow. For now, simply sleep.